P226, decades after its original design in the early 80s, is still issued by military forces to this day, in service for over 40 years. While one of the most famous users, the Navy SEALs, ceased issuing them in the mid-2010s, they were not the only elite fighting force to carry them. Everyone from Indonesia's commando units to Romanian special operations to the storied SAS. So naturally, one of the first things I did once my P226 project was finished was to layer myself in as much tactical gear as I could muster and head out into the woods to LARP as a badass. Get down! I just saw movement up at the house. No one's supposed to be home right now. The wife and kids are off at their mother's. Might not be a LARP after all. I might actually have to put this gear to use. My heart's racing. Have I done enough dry fire? Have I memorized my home's layout well enough to clear it? How many bad guys do you think there are? Oh, here goes nothing.
Surprise!
Damn it, Janet, watch with the lights. You know how expensive my nods were? Wait, why do all of you have guns? Fun and games aside, after we take a look at a couple glamour shots of the build, let's go see how it shoots before we finish up with the details on what we learned over the course of this project, learned about the platform, and what I think of it in the end. And of course, let's thank our sponsor, Desert Depot Arms, for helping back my educational efforts with series like these. I wouldn't be able to churn out content this quickly without great folks like them. Don't forget to like and subscribe, or else this message will self-destruct in 10 seconds. Watching those first couple of shots, you might have thought to yourself, wow, he's not doing so great. He's missing some of those targets and it's not very far away. That's because I need to continually remind myself that these sights don't work the same as the guns that I shoot most frequently, Glocks. So these are sights that use what is called a combat sight picture. So basically, when I line up the sights like that, my target isn't above the front sight. That dot on the front sight should be covering my target, which takes some real getting used to. It's odd, and whenever I pull it out and start shooting for the first time that day, without fail I forget that and I start missing. And then I remind myself, like, okay, that's fine. But it does have one positive, being I don't actually care that I don't have suppressor height sights on this weapon, because with the suppressor installed, I still am covering my target with the sights. So I'm not losing anything. And as you can see, this particular suppressor, an Octane 45, its diameter is just about equivalent to the height of those sights. So I was actually shooting just as well with the suppressor on as I was without, because it's kind of the same. So I thought that was interesting. Welcome to the lessons learned portion of the finale for this build. And boy, are there a couple, so buckle up. Let's start with probably the easiest one to understand. And that is, at the end of episode 2, I recommended that Matrix Precision tells you to loosen up the takedown lever hole with the easy way being some sandpaper wrapped on a dowel that fits in and sanded away. I didn't do it on film because I hadn't cerakoted this yet, and so it made no sense to try and loosen up a hole that I was just going to go cerakote again later. I did a little loosening up, but it is still extreme. I'm pushing with all my might. It's extremely tight. I need to fix this, especially because I keep hurting myself. So this was about 5 minutes ago. I took a piece of wood and I used that to torque it down. And of course, when it gets to a certain point, that slips, and then I have a big gash here from one of these parts. So take that seriously. I'm gonna go fix that. You don't take your slide off too often, but man, take them seriously when they say loosen up that hole a little bit. The next thing I want to talk about is barrels. So as you'll see here, I've actually got two barrels for this, and I want to talk about a mistake I made with the barrel that came with the kit. So I put this gun together prior to cerakoting it, and everything fit just fine. When I went to go put it together after cerakote, I put the barrel in and it would not go into lockup. So you'll see here, I ended up removing the cerakote from the front here, and actually the sight at the front wasn't in yet, so I could actually check it like that until it fit. That's not the end of the world. But once I got it to fit, what I kept seeing was that it didn't appear to go fully up into lockup. I hadn't taken any pictures that I could find at the time, or measurements of just how far up this is supposed to go. So I started looking at pictures online, and everyone else's seems to go much further up into the slide than mine did. So I started doing something stupid. I started to try and chase down where I was getting held up, and you'll see I tried to mess with the flat here so it would go up. That didn't help. I relieved this probably more than I should, but thankfully there doesn't seem to be any actual movement, so I guess I didn't relieve it too much. But I relieved a little bit at the back here, and again I was taking measurements and I was finding the tight spots and looking for wear and whatnot, but it kept not working, and so I kept going. And like I said, the gun functions perfectly fine with this barrel. There doesn't seem to be any looseness in my lockup. So I didn't go what I would call too far, but I slapped my own hand a little bit because I should have known better. I should have been more meticulous about how I addressed this. I did not have the opinion that these guns were going to be gunsmith fit type stuff in any way, shape, or form. I didn't have the opinion that these tolerances were that tight, like say a 1911 were. But apparently in some places they are, because what ended up being the problem was not my lockup. I was actually going up as far as it was going to let me. What finally was the clue for me as to where I was getting hung up was after I'd made a whole bunch of relief, I was pushing on the barrel, and see, it moves. The barrel's able to flex up further into position if I put a lot of pressure on it. That told me that the lockup here was not what was restricting the barrel from sitting further up. I wish I had taken measurements of how far this set up prior to messing with the barrel at all. That would have saved me a lot of heartache. I wish I'd have done that. But what I figured out is I took the barrel and I added a piece of tape, and if I put it in and I do that press up check again and flex the barrel up further into lockup, watch what happens. It has actually cut the tape. See? So I was able to figure out why my barrel wasn't going up further. It had nothing to do with lockup. I was perfectly fine. My barrel was fully in lockup as per this slide barrel combination, how it wanted to sit. It was actually, I couldn't go any further. It was limited by where the barrel was interacting with the bottom of the slide up at the nose. So I was good despite not knowing it. And so I kept doing work that I shouldn't have done. What was the problem was actually this foot here. It was getting caught just enough to, instead of allowing it to go over the locking block, it would get dragged down when I was trying to get the slide on. And you can actually see it's done a little bit of damage to the feed ramp of the barrel. So I did not expect maybe 1/1000th or 2 of an inch of cerakote material to lift this up high enough, or 1/1000th of an inch here to make that interference enough to make it so I couldn't get the barrel on. And because I've said that, I want to tell you just how good the cerakote job was on this barrel. That's a very good, thin cerakote job. That is how tight the tolerances were here. So keep that in mind. be more judicious than I was about the fitting of your components, because sometimes even the smallest little bit can be enough. So I ended up doing a bunch of research online, and I'm not the only one to ever encounter this, and it's actually apparently okay to just shave a little bit off the bottom here, and that fixed this barrel going onto the slide. It works. I've shot this gun a bunch with this barrel, but it's unsightly because I did more work and removed cerakote in spots that, even though you'll never see those spots when the barrel's in, I know they're there. I know I was stupid. So I'm not happy with myself there. But again, what I want you to take away from this is there are tight tolerances in this platform that you might not expect. Either way, like I said, it works. However, what I found extremely interesting is, because I was displeased with how my barrel turned out, I bugged the guys at Desert Depot Arms to hook me up with this guy, Silencer Co. threaded barrel for the P226. And this is going to show you just how tight and picky the tolerances are. I have not modified the foot on this at all to fit. This barrel goes on perfectly fine with no modification. So literally, it was the thickness of the cerakote. That's how tight that tolerance is there. The final lesson learned I want to talk about is I have never had so much trouble getting what I would refer to as the correct grips for a gun on any project before. There's something unique to this style of gun where both the aesthetic and the feel of the grip are not only difficult to get right, at least for me, but are so much more important than on a lot of other guns. So my kit, as I said in episode 1, came with these Hogue overmolded grips. I did not like them. In the end, I ended up with these just straight black chain link Hogue grips that I got from Desert Depot Arms. I like them. But you might go, well, how are they drastically different from these Hogue G10 grips? Well, these are the ones that I bought originally. And although the colors match fairly well, the pattern differed so much from this kind of two-tone faded camo that I just couldn't get behind them. The feel was correct on these versus the rubberized grips, but aesthetically I just could not live with it. Same kind of went for the rosewood look here. You can see that that wouldn't have worked really well. I think the reason why it's so difficult to get the grips correct on this weapon platform aesthetically is, one, I've got a very complex finish on my slide. You might not be dealing with that. But even without that, if you've just got solid colors other than black, you're dealing with a grip that takes up an inordinate amount of space on the weapon compared to grips on other weapons. Usually you've just got the side grip. Here, the grip is side, goes all the way down to the magazine, and is a full wrap around the back. I mean, that is a ton of real estate that you have to get aesthetically correct to match the rest of the theme of your build, if that sort of stuff matters to you. And to me, it does. I want an attractive gun. That was the difficult part, number one. And like I said, I finally just chimped out and went solid black. The other thing that I want to point out is how the grips affect the weapon functionally. So the main reason I didn't like the feel of these rubberized grips, apparently, is the dimensions of them. So let's take a look at what we've got here. The widths of the grips are 1.347. In a cocked back single action trigger mode, we've got 2.731 inches between the center of the trigger and the maximum close in that your hand can get. So now I've got the rubberized grips back on, and immediately you can even see how much thicker they're going to be by how deep these screws sit into the grip compared to them almost being flush with the surface on the G10 grips. But let's make numbers tell that story. 1.45. So that is decently thicker. So we were at 134. So that's almost 1/8 of an inch thicker. Let's take a look at what it is for the reach. 2.753. So not drastically different for the reach, but my God, the thickness of these grips. And when I was playing with this before I got the G10 grips, that is uncomfortable of a length to start that double action trigger pull. When you're working with single action, absolutely that feels normal. But the double action, you feel like you're all the way out there. So unless you've got giant meat paws, I highly recommend ditching the rubberized grips and going for something that'll help slim this platform down a little bit. Since there was an entire episode in this series devoted to the different trigger styles of the P226, P229 family of weapon, and how I was switching between the DAC and the double action, single action, and how I did that, I can't not include some discussion of the trigger in the series finale as well. And in order to do that, we're going to bring back 2 previous weapons from previous series on this channel. My Geisler, a Glock style weapon, and my 80% 1911. And the reason I want to do this is for those of you that are not familiar with the different types of triggers that are seen here, it may be hard to imagine what this feels like. All have been safety checked already. Don't even have magazines in any of them now. What we're trying to get at here is with the Glock, you've got that take up, and then you've got that wall, and then you've got a little bit of, it's not super crisp. Once you hit the wall, there's still some movement after that before it breaks. And you can get better triggers than this. This is an OEM. There are some fancy ones, but in general, that's what we're up against. Whereas with the 1911, yeah, you have a tiny bit of take up, and that can be adjusted with a screw here, but that's always going to be the nice, clean break right there at that wall. With the double action, single action, you get something very different. That first pull, heavy, 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 a lot of movement for the entire range. It's not like the Glock where, yeah, you've got a lot of movement, but it's light. No, this one's fighting you. Until you finally, no wall, it just breaks at some point. But if this were shooting actual rounds, that would then keep the hammer cocked back. And from there, yes, a lot of movement still, but there's no weight on that. Like it might as well not be there. And then that second pull past the wall, it has a little movement, but it's a lot more akin to what we get on the Glock here. But its weight feels closer to that of a 1911. So this is kind of somewhere between these guns, and why I wanted to bring them out. I really enjoy this trigger I'm finding, because while the 1911 is a nicer trigger feel to me, it's only single action. I can't actually cock the hammer in any way, shape, or form using the trigger. So that function of the double action, single action is very handy for that first round, but you pay that price. But once you get into single action mode, which is as simple as cocking the hammer or racking the slide, I mean, it is almost as nice as the 1911. So if I were to rate these, I would say probably my favorite trigger is still the 1911, then this one that we just built in single action mode, then the Glock, and then last would be this in double action. I don't enjoy the double action. However, that comes with a benefit. You can use this to train yourself to be a better shooter. So if you've got one of these training aids, if you can get high scores on these training apps using double action only, guess what? All of a sudden, you're going to be a much better shooter because you're getting high scores training with full double action. And the other really nice thing about that is I don't have to re-rack my slide after every shot in the program. I can keep going all day long. Whereas if I were using, say, the Glock or the 1911, I would have to rack, fire, rack, fire. That's annoying. I'd prefer not do that. So this is a great weapon as a training aid. So this is actually the weapon that I keep my Mantis on now for that exact reason.